The most dangerous leaders in history were not followed by evil people. They were followed by teachers, doctors, parents, soldiers, neighbors, people who believed they were doing the right thing. That is the part history rarely talks about, because it is comforting to imagine that terrible outcomes are created by terrible people. The evidence suggests something far more disturbing. Some of history's worst leaders were followed by ordinary, moral, intelligent people who never intended to participate in anything harmful, which raises an uncomfortable question. If they couldn't see it, would you? In 1961, a psychologist at Yale University designed an experiment. He believed it would prove that ordinary Americans would refuse to harm another person when ordered to do so. The experiment produced one of the most disturbing findings in the history of psychology, and it revealed a mechanism that has quietly shaped empires, institutions, governments, companies, and organizations for thousands of years. A mechanism so powerful that once you see it, you begin noticing it everywhere, including places you would rather not. Yale University, New Haven, Connecticut, 1961. The man walking into the laboratory looked completely ordinary, because he was. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't violent. He wasn't unstable. He wasn't unusually obedient. He was a postal worker, a salesman, a teacher, an accountant. The kind of person you might sit next to on a plane and forget 5 minutes later. That was precisely why Stanley Milgram chose him. Milgram had spent years asking a question that haunted the 20th century. How had ordinary people participated in extraordinary evil? The world had just witnessed the Nuremberg trials. Former Nazi officials stood before judges and offered a remarkably consistent defense. They had only followed orders. To many people, that explanation sounded impossible, cowardly, convenient, a lie told after the fact. Milgram suspected something far more disturbing. What if they were telling the truth? Not the moral truth, the psychological truth. What if the people carrying out horrific acts weren't monsters? What if they were ordinary people operating inside a structure they accepted as legitimate? To test the idea, Milgram placed an advertisement in a local newspaper. Participants were told they would take part in a study on memory and learning. Nothing more. No mention of obedience, no mention of authority, no mention of what the experiment was actually designed to measure. The men arrived at Yale expecting a routine academic study. Instead, they unknowingly walked into one of the most important experiments ever conducted, and one of the most unsettling. When each participant arrived, he met two people, the researcher and another participant. At least, that is what he believed. In reality, the second participant was an actor. The roles were assigned. One person would become the learner. The other would become the teacher. The draw was rigged. The real participant always became the teacher. The actor always became the learner. The learner was then escorted into another room. Electrodes were attached to his arm. The teacher watched this happen. Everything looked real. Everything felt legitimate. That part was important, because Milgram wasn't studying cruelty. He was studying legitimacy. The teacher was seated in front of a machine. 30 switches, each labeled with increasing voltage. 15 volts, higher and higher, until the final switch. 450 volts. Danger. Severe shock. The learner would answer questions. Every incorrect answer required a shock. At first, the learner merely complained, then protested, then shouted, then screamed, then begged, then demanded to be released. Then something even worse happened. Silence. No answers. No voice. Nothing. Many participants became visibly distressed. Some laughed nervously. Some sweated. Some trembled. Several argued with the researcher. A few stood up. One buried his face in his hands. Another pulled at his hair. Most people watching these recordings today assume that is where the experiment ended. It didn't. The participants continued. Again and again and again. Each time they hesitated, the researcher responded with a scripted prompt. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. The words were surprisingly ordinary. There were no threats, no punishments, no force, no violence, just a man in a white coat, standing inside Yale University. Before Milgram ran the experiment, he asked experts to predict the outcome. Psychiatrists, professors, students. They all gave roughly the same answer. Almost everyone would refuse. Most predicted that fewer than 1 person in 1,000 would continue all the way to 450 volts. The prediction seemed reasonable. After all, who would knowingly administer a potentially lethal shock to another human being? The answer shocked psychology. 65%, nearly 2/3, continued to the maximum voltage, not because they enjoyed it, not because they wanted to. Many were visibly horrified by what they believed they were doing, but they continued anyway. That result changed psychology forever, because Milgram realized something profound. The participants were not obeying the researcher, at least not primarily. They were obeying something larger: the white coat, the clipboard, the laboratory, the university, the institution, the structure. The researcher was simply the visible face of it. When Milgram later removed Yale from the equation and conducted the experiment in an ordinary office building, compliance dropped dramatically. The instructions were identical. The machine was identical. The researcher was identical. Only one thing changed: the structure surrounding the authority. And that changed everything. Milgram's most disturbing discovery was not that people obey authority. History already knew that. His discovery was that the human brain evaluates legitimacy before it evaluates morality. Before most participants asked, "Is this right?" their brain had already answered a different question. Is this legitimate? And once legitimacy was established, morality often arrived too late. That insight should have remained inside a psychology textbook. Instead, it explains some of the most important events in human history. Because 2,000 years before Stanley Milgram built his laboratory, another structure had already discovered the same mechanism. Not in a university, not in an experiment, but in the most powerful political institution of the ancient world, the Roman Senate. And unlike Yale, the consequences would last for centuries. Rome, 27 BC. Imagine walking into the Roman Senate. Marble floors, white togas, the most powerful political institution in the ancient world. For nearly 500 years, the Roman Republic had survived wars, invasions, rebellions, and political crises. Generations of Romans believed their system was unique. No kings, no dictators, no single man above the law. The Republic was not merely a government. It was part of Rome's identity. And yet, on this day, the Republic was already dying. Most of the men inside the Senate simply didn't know it yet. The irony is almost impossible to ignore. The Republic wasn't destroyed by a foreign invasion. It wasn't burned down. It wasn't conquered. Nobody stormed the Senate with an army. Instead, Rome surrendered its freedom through a series of perfectly legal decisions. One vote at a time, one compromise at a time, one emergency at a time. The structure remained intact. The function quietly changed underneath it. And that is what makes the story so important. Because this isn't a story about tyranny, it's a story about legitimacy. The man standing at the center of it all was Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar. History would later know him as Augustus, the first Roman emperor. But he didn't call himself emperor. That would have been too obvious. And Augustus understood something Julius Caesar never fully grasped. People resist a man claiming absolute power. They rarely resist a structure granting it. Julius Caesar had made a mistake. He concentrated power openly. The Senate could see it. The public could see it. His enemies could see it, and eventually, they stabbed him for it. 23 knives, one lesson. Never attack the structure, own it. Augustus learned that lesson perfectly. Instead of replacing the Republic, he preserved it, at least on the surface. The Senate continued meeting. Elections continued. Courts continued. Titles remained. Procedures remained. Debates remained. Everything looked familiar. Everything looked legitimate. And that was the genius. Because once people accept the structure, they stop questioning what the structure is doing. In 27 BC, Augustus stood before the Senate and did something remarkable. He offered to resign, or at least that is what it appeared to be. After years of civil war, he announced that extraordinary powers should be returned to the Republic. The gesture seemed noble, selfless, patriotic. The exhausted senators reacted exactly as Augustus expected. They begged him to stay. They insisted Rome still needed him. They urged him to retain authority, and Augustus reluctantly agreed. At least that was the performance. The reality was very different. This is where the psychological mechanism becomes visible. The Senate believed it was making a choice, but the available choices had already been designed. The structure felt legitimate. The process felt legitimate. The vote felt legitimate. Therefore, the outcome felt legitimate. Even though the outcome fundamentally transformed the Republic. Notice how similar this is to Milgram's laboratory. The participant looked at Yale. The senator looked at the Senate. Both saw a legitimate institution. Both assumed legitimacy meant safety, and both stopped asking deeper questions. The terrifying thing about Augustus is not that he seized power. The terrifying thing is that he rarely needed to. The Senate gave it to him, willingly, repeatedly, legally, every new title, every emergency power, every exception, every special privilege, presented as reasonable, temporary, necessary, until eventually there was no meaningful distinction between the Republic and one man's authority. And yet many senators continued behaving as if nothing fundamental had changed. Why? Because the structure still existed. The meetings continued, the votes continued, the rituals continued, the form remained. And the human brain has a dangerous habit. It assumes that if the form survives, the function must survive too. This may be Augustus's greatest psychological achievement. Not conquering Rome, redefining reality without appearing to change it. The Senate still looked like the Senate. The Republic still looked like the Republic. But underneath those familiar symbols, something entirely different had emerged. A monarchy disguised as a republic. An empire disguised as a republic. Power disguised as procedure. And most people accepted it because every signal around them said they should. The same way Milgram's participants accepted the experiment. Not because they were weak, not because they were stupid, because the structure told them it was legitimate. And legitimacy has a strange effect on human beings. Once we grant it, we often stop looking. This is the line historians return to again and again. The Republic was preserved. The Republic was gone. Both statements were true, and that contradiction contains one of the most important lessons in the history of power. Because the most successful leaders rarely destroy institutions. They inherit them, preserve their appearance, and quietly replace their function. The structure remains, the meaning changes, the building remains, the purpose changes, the ritual remains, the power moves somewhere else, and by the time people recognize what happened, the transition is already complete. Which raises a deeper question. If Milgram showed how authority gains compliance, and Augustus showed how authority hides inside institutions, what conditions make that process so effective? Why do intelligent people continue participating even when the warning signs become visible? Why does resistance seem obvious in hindsight, but almost invisible in the moment? Psychologists eventually discovered that the mechanism depends on 3 conditions. And once you understand them, you begin to see the pattern everywhere. not just in history, in companies, governments, universities, organizations, even your own life. And the first condition is the one your brain evaluates before anything else: legitimacy. The unsettling thing about Milgram's experiment is not that it worked. The unsettling thing is how little it required. No threats, no weapons, no violence, no punishment for refusing, just a structure and a belief that the structure was legitimate. After publishing his findings, Milgram spent years trying to answer a deeper question. What specific conditions make ordinary people surrender their independent judgment? What transforms intelligent individuals into participants in outcomes they would normally reject? The answer wasn't one condition, it was three. And once all three appear together, the mechanism becomes extraordinarily powerful. History has repeated this pattern so often that it almost feels like a law. The first condition is legitimacy. The second is incremental escalation. The third is diffusion of responsibility. And together they explain far more of human behavior than most people realize. Condition 1. Legitimacy. The human brain asks a question before almost every other question. Not, is this right? But, is this legitimate? That distinction changes everything. Imagine two people giving the same instruction. One wears a white laboratory coat at Yale University. The other stands on a street corner. The instruction is identical, yet the response is completely different. Why? Because the brain is constantly looking for signals that determine who deserves compliance. Titles, institutions, uniforms, credentials, buildings, procedures, symbols, the markers of legitimacy. These signals evolved for a reason. No human being can independently verify every decision, every rule, every expert claim, every instruction. Civilization would collapse if we tried. So the brain developed a shortcut. If the source appears legitimate, accept first. Question later. Most of the time this works. Occasionally, it becomes dangerous. The Roman Senate understood legitimacy. The Catholic Church understood legitimacy. Modern corporations understand legitimacy. Governments understand legitimacy. Universities understand legitimacy. Every institution in human history has relied upon it. Because legitimacy allows people to cooperate at scale. But it also creates a blind spot. Once legitimacy becomes established, people often stop examining what legitimacy is being used to justify. The structure becomes trusted, and trust becomes automatic. Milgram discovered that the authority wasn't the researcher. The authority was Yale. Augustus discovered that the authority wasn't Augustus. The authority was Rome. The structure carried the weight. The individual simply stood inside it. But legitimacy alone is not enough. Because even legitimate institutions occasionally ask people to do things that feel wrong, which is where the second condition appears. Condition 2. Incremental escalation. Nobody in Milgram's experiment began at 450 volts. They began at 15, then 30, then 45, then 60. Each step seemed insignificant. Each decision felt small. Each action appeared disconnected from the outcome. And that was the genius. Human beings rarely walk into disaster. They drift into it. One small step at a time. A tiny compromise, a minor exception, a temporary measure. A decision that seems harmless because it is viewed in isolation. Then another, then another, then another, until eventually people find themselves somewhere they never intended to go. Looking back and wondering how they arrived there, the answer is almost always the same: incrementally. Augustus understood this perfectly. He did not become Rome's supreme ruler overnight. He did not announce, "The Republic is over." That would have triggered resistance. Instead, he moved slowly, carefully. One title, one privilege, one emergency authority, one exception, One precedent, one adjustment. Every step appeared reasonable. Every step appeared temporary. Every step could be justified, until the accumulation of small changes became something entirely new. And by then, there was no obvious point at which anyone could say, "This is where it happened," because it never happened all at once. This may be the most dangerous feature of human psychology. Large changes trigger alarm. Small changes often don't. The brain evaluates decisions individually. History accumulates them collectively, and those are not the same thing. Which brings us to the third condition, the most dangerous condition of all. Condition 3. Diffusion of responsibility. Imagine standing in a crowded room. You notice something is wrong. A decision, a policy, a direction everyone seems to be moving. You hesitate, but then a thought appears. Surely someone else has already examined this. Surely someone more qualified would object. Surely someone closer to the situation would say something. And so you remain silent. Almost everyone has experienced this, and that is precisely why it is so powerful. The individual responsibility becomes diluted by the group. The larger the group becomes, the smaller each person's sense of personal accountability feels. Not because people are immoral, because responsibility feels distributed, shared, collective, and therefore strangely weightless. Milgram saw it in his laboratory. Participants repeatedly explained their actions the same way. The researcher was responsible. The university was responsible. Someone else was responsible. Not me, not entirely, not individually. The Roman Senate behaved similarly. 300 intelligent men, many privately concerned, many privately uncertain, yet collectively moving in the same direction. Why? Because each senator assumed the others had already evaluated the situation. Each person borrowed confidence from the group, and the group borrowed confidence from the institution, until nobody was actually performing the moral evaluation independently anymore. The structure was doing it for them, or so they believed. This is the moment every dangerous leader understands. The moment silence becomes self-sustaining. Because once enough people assume someone else will object, nobody objects. And once nobody objects, the absence of objection becomes evidence that no objection exists. That illusion has shaped more of history than most armies ever have. Now step back. Look at the mechanism as a whole. Legitimacy, incremental escalation, diffusion of responsibility. One convinces you the structure can be trusted. One prevents you from noticing how far you've moved. One convinces you that someone else is responsible. Separately, they are powerful. Together, they become something else entirely. A system capable of persuading good people to participate in outcomes they would never have chosen on their own. Which raises a deeply uncomfortable question. If these mechanisms are permanent features of human psychology, where are they operating right now? Not in history, not in Rome, not in Milgram's laboratory, in your world. And that's where the story becomes personal. The comforting thing about history is distance. It allows us to look at the past and believe we would have behaved differently. We look at Rome, at Milgram's laboratory, at failed organizations and disastrous decisions, and we tell ourselves the same story. I would have seen it. I would have spoken up. I would have been different. Maybe. But there is a problem with that belief. Every person who remained silent in history believed exactly the same thing about themselves. No one wakes up intending to become the quiet participant in a bad outcome. Silence usually arrives disguised as something else. Professionalism, patience, loyalty, pragmatism, timing. The belief that now is not the right moment. The belief that someone else is already handling it. The belief that the concern isn't important enough to raise. And that is why the mechanism survives, not because people stop caring, because they find reasons to wait. Think about the environments where human beings spend most of their lives. Companies, governments, hospitals, universities, military organizations, religious institutions. Every one of them depends on structure, rules, hierarchy, procedure, authority. Without those things, large groups cannot function. The problem is that the same structures that make cooperation possible can also make questioning difficult. Not impossible, just uncomfortable, and human beings are remarkably skilled at avoiding discomfort. Imagine a meeting, 10 people around a table. A proposal appears. Something about it feels wrong. Not obviously wrong, not dramatically wrong, just wrong enough to trigger hesitation. You glance around the room. Nobody speaks. The silence communicates something. Perhaps everyone else understands this better than I do. Perhaps they know something I don't. Perhaps my concern isn't important. And within seconds, the concern begins to dissolve. Not because it was answered, because it was not shared. The absence of objection becomes evidence that no objection exists. Psychologists call this pluralistic ignorance. Almost everyone privately doubts. Everyone assumes everyone else agrees. And because everyone assumes agreement, everyone behaves as if agreement exists. The result is extraordinary. Entire groups move in directions that many individuals never actually supported. Not because they were forced, because they misread the silence around them. History is full of moments like this. Rooms full of intelligent people, privately uncertain, publicly compliant, each person borrowing confidence from the group borrowing confidence from the institution, and the institution borrowing confidence from its own legitimacy. The circle closes. The mechanism sustains itself. The dangerous part is that nobody inside the system experiences themselves as doing anything unusual. That is what Milgram discovered. Participants did not feel cruel. Senators did not feel complicit. Employees do not feel irresponsible. People inside systems usually experience themselves as reasonable, cooperative, professional, responsible. And most of the time they are, which is exactly why the mechanism is so difficult to detect. It does not feel like moral surrender. It feels like normal behavior. Think about how many historical disasters began with ordinary decisions. Not dramatic decisions, not shocking decisions, small decisions, one approval, one signature, one compromise, one vote, one exception, one moment of silence. History often remembers the catastrophe. It forgets the 1,000 ordinary moments that made the catastrophe possible. Because ordinary moments are difficult to notice while they are happening. Only later do they appear obvious. Only later does everyone ask, why didn't someone stop this? That question is almost always asked from the outside. The more useful question is asked from the inside. Why did everyone assume someone else would? Because that is where the mechanism lives. Not in the leader, not in the institution, not in the decision, in the assumption. The assumption that responsibility belongs elsewhere. The assumption that someone more qualified is paying attention. The assumption that if something were truly wrong, someone would say so. The assumption that silence means safety. History repeatedly suggests otherwise. This is why the most dangerous leaders rarely spend their time convincing everyone. They don't need to. They only need to create a structure where questioning becomes slightly more uncomfortable than compliance. A structure where objections feel disruptive. A structure where responsibility feels shared. A structure where legitimacy is never examined because legitimacy is assumed. Once those conditions exist, the system begins operating on its own. People police themselves. Silence reproduces itself. The structure no longer requires force. It requires only participation. And participation is usually voluntary. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable realization in the entire story. The mechanism is not historical. It is present. Right now, somewhere, in some institution, in some organization, in some meeting, possibly one you are part of. Not because the people involved are bad, because they are human. The same way the participants in Milgram's laboratory were human. The same way the Roman senators were human. the same way we are human. And that raises a question far more important than anything that happened in Yale or Rome. How do you recognize the mechanism while you are inside it? How do you see the structure before the outcome becomes obvious? Because that question may be the only protection we actually have. And it begins with a habit almost nobody practices often enough: questioning the structure itself. There is a comforting way to watch this documentary. You can treat it as a story about other people. The participants in Milgram's laboratory, the senators in ancient Rome, the employees who stayed silent, the citizens who complied, the generations that failed to recognize what was happening around them. History provides endless examples, and from a distance the mistakes always seem obvious. The difficulty is that nobody in those stories knew they were the example. That realization only arrives later, usually much later. The participant in Milgram's experiment never walked into Yale thinking, "Today I will discover how easily authority can influence me." The Roman senator never walked into the Senate thinking, "Today I will help dismantle the Republic." The employee never walks into a meeting thinking, "Today I will stay silent when I should speak." Human beings do not experience history the way historians do. We experience it one decision at a time, one meeting at a time, one compromise at a time, one moment of silence at a time. That is why the mechanism is so difficult to recognize. It never announces itself. It never arrives carrying a warning sign. It never says, "You are now participating in something you will regret." Instead, it arrives disguised as normality. A normal meeting, a normal policy, a normal vote, a normal instruction, a normal day. History's most important turning points rarely feel important while they are happening. They feel ordinary. That is what makes them dangerous. Think about the participants in Milgram's laboratory one last time. Most were visibly uncomfortable. Many objected, some argued. Several wanted to stop. And yet most continued, not because they lacked a conscience, because they outsourced it. The structure had already told them what was acceptable. The responsibility belonged somewhere else. The decision belonged somewhere else. The moral burden belonged somewhere else. And once that transfer occurred, the mechanism took over. Now think about Rome. 300 senators, many intelligent, many experienced, many privately concerned, yet collectively moving in the same direction. Not because they lacked intelligence, because intelligence is not the defense most people imagine it to be. The participants in Milgram's experiment were intelligent. The senators were intelligent. Intelligence does not protect people from authority. Sometimes it simply helps them justify compliance more elegantly. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable conclusion of all. The question is not whether you are susceptible to this mechanism. You are. So am I. Every human being is. The evidence is overwhelming. The mechanism appears across cultures, across centuries, across political systems, across professions, across institutions. The details change. Human psychology does not. The real question is whether you know where the mechanism is operating, and that is a much harder question to answer. Because somewhere in your life there is a structure, a company, a profession, an institution, an organization, a belief system, a process, a hierarchy. Something you have accepted as legitimate, something you rarely examine because it feels normal, something whose function may no longer match its form. The structure remains. But has the purpose changed? The procedure remains. But has the outcome changed? The institution remains. But has the incentive changed? These are not historical questions. They are present tense questions. Milgram discovered that legitimacy often arrives before morality. Augustus discovered that preserving a structure is often enough to preserve compliance. History discovered that responsibility becomes invisible when enough people share it. And every dangerous leader who came after discovered the same thing. You do not need people to agree. You only need them to stop questioning. Which leaves one final question. Not about Rome, not about Yale, not about history, about you. What structure are you inside right now that you have not examined in years? Who built it? What was it built to do? And when was the last time you asked whether it still does? Because the most dangerous leaders in history were rarely the ones who seized power. They were the ones who inherited legitimacy, wrapped themselves in structure, and waited for good people to mistake familiarity for safety. The tragedy was never that people followed. The tragedy was that most never realized they were following until the outcome was already obvious. And by then, history had already moved. Power shapes history. Human nature repeats it. But awareness changes the equation. The moment you begin questioning the structure, the mechanism weakens. The moment you examine legitimacy instead of assuming it, the mechanism weakens. The moment responsibility becomes personal again, the mechanism weakens. That is not a guarantee. It is not immunity. It is simply the beginning of awareness. And awareness is where every act of independent judgment starts. Power shapes history. Human nature repeats it.